All right, guys, welcome back. We're kind of diving a little bit more into some intricacies about leadership and certain principles, characteristics, things like that that we believe that good leaders embody. This one we're going to specifically kind of dive into the importance of leading with emotional intelligence. So, in the psychological world, they say EQ versus IQ. There's a big shift, I think, in the I'll say early 2000s to mid 2010s ish of a lot of leaders kind of leaning more towards the EQ side versus strictly taking somebody for their skill set and adapting them. So I've had some great mentorship in the side of leading with emotional intelligence and understanding your audience, quote unquote, or who you're speaking to, how they speak, how they receive motivation, how they receive criticism, how they receive constructive criticism, and how much that's different for each individual, as well as learning to adapt in a conversation that you may be having with multiple people, getting the same point across while speaking what could kind of be considered multiple languages, right? Same technical language, but different delivery of the same message. So luckily I have Christian here to talk about some EQ as well. But transparently in my time at Pride, one of the things that I've appreciated the most about Christian as a leader is his ability to lead with EQ and his ability and adaptability with human psychology and understanding people on a deeper level than just you're here to perform this job and then move on, right? So it's one of the things that I think him and I connected on and had in common from the start was the fascination or idea of understanding how people receive information in between each other and how people can be led to be successful using very different tactics and methods. So I don't know if you want to briefly kind of touch on your experience with maybe leaders that you've had in the past or coaches that you've had in the past, whatever that looks like, that have lacked EQ, or some that maybe have had profound impacts on, your ability to read EQ.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start off with I might nerd out a little bit with this type of conversation. I'm just fascinated by the human brain. Just absolutely fascinated by it. I mentioned in other videos, I think it was in just the last video, the imposter syndrome video about how I kind of feel as though, I'm a bit of an imposter sitting in the position that I am, given that this is a construction company. I don't have any lengthy construction experience or generational knowledge and that type of stuff in the industry. But there's a reason that my time in college kind of consisted around the idea of studying on a microscopic level, even down to a microscopic level, I should say, the what's going on inside of your brain. And it wasn't something that really clicked for me until I got into the professional world, how applicable what I was learning actually could be. I kind of did it for fun, to be frank. I was doing all kinds of biology classes and stuff because I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And I took a psychology class once as an elective because I just had to fill electives. And it turns out it was the coolest class that I ever been in. And so I sort of conjoined the two, or we're talking about biology and psychology, in sync. And that's like I said, it really didn't click until my professional career, where I start to understand how useful what I was learning actually was. So if you want to talk about like experiences with other leaders, I've had a handful of different bosses and people over time, and I've seen all sides of the spectrum. I've seen the people that are like, you show up, you do this job, and you go home, and it's the farthest extent that they go in terms of their management. It's like, you did this wrong, F and fix it, versus this is what I've seen from your input, and this is what I know about your ability as a person. Here's how I think that we should address this moving forward. You're saying the exact same thing, literally to the T. It's the exact same message that you're getting across, but one is F and fix it, and one is let's learn how to grow and adapt and become a better person, right? And so Um, I'd say actually this is a good example. When I worked in the gym industry, my first job, well, I guess it wasn't my first job in the gym industry, but it was the one that I had the longest tenure with when I worked for Aspire Fitness. I worked directly for the two owners, and one of them had an incredibly high EQ. The other had a very, and he also had a very high IQ. He was like a absolute,
Savant.
he was just incredible human. I hope he watches some of these videos because he's like, I just look at him like I want to be like Nolan, you know. And then there's the other guy who had impressively high IQ. He understood business. He got what we were doing, but his delivery methods and the way that he conducted himself made it so that nobody wanted to follow him
Right.
ever. Right. So like I knew what he was trying to get across because I had enough of a understanding, high enough IQ. I don't know what you want to call it, but I knew what he was trying to get across and I dealt with it. But I never wanted to follow him. I never wanted to be around him. My intention was how can I do this job so well that I never have to hear from this boss. That was my intention, you know. So, um, and you watch it play out in their history as an organization. I mean, they grew incredibly fast. They went from one gym into 36 units within a time span of about 4 years, which
That's
is
extremely
incredible
fast.
growth, right? Like just incredible. They had a incredibly brilliant business model. They knew how to sell it to people. It was mainly Nolan, the one that I'm talking about. Mainly, he knew how to spread the vision and get it so other people bought into the vision. So he was out growing and developing while he was thinking about the ins and outs and the process, procedure, accounting, blah blah, whatever. But their demise actually came down to, in my opinion, an individual decision made by the person on the IQ side.
Yep.
And what happened was there was a bit of a mutiny, to be frank. There was a bunch of managers who did not want to follow him because he made the decision of electing to put somebody in a position who wasn't experienced in the position, one, and two, he was family. So there was nepotism involved with it. And so they all did not want to work for him. And instead of hearing them out and finding a way to make it work or selling on them working or showing them how to communicate and that type of stuff, how empathetic or high EQ leader would, you know, deal with the ripple by making a learning lesson,
Right.
he fired every single one of them in the same day.
Nice.
Right. So he made what he thought was a calculated business decision because he thought, you know, intellectually, he's like, you know, this would be, I can backfill this because they all have assistant managers. I have other employees. We can recruit. We could train. We can get people who can buy into this concept that I want to run. And they never thoroughly filled the shoes because turns out those leaders left an imprint on the people below them. They didn't want to follow in suit. They knew what had happened, this exodus or this purging or whatever you want to call it, left a mark where nobody wanted to expand themselves within this career any longer.
So was that, because I've heard you reference that before, but was that nepotism-based decision the demise of a company that large?
There were a multitude of decisions that were smaller that added to it, but that
It was
individual
the straw that broke the camel's
that
back.
that individual piece was very much the lead. It was like the growth was like this,
Yeah.
and it immediately went like this, then like this, immediately after.
It's amazing how fragile and volatile a decision can.
Well, you know, if you're thinking totally dollars and cents, totally intellectually or whatever you want to call it, it's like, okay, I'll just trim those pieces off. I'll save some money here. I'll redevelop the people that are next to them. They are expendable, right? People aren't expendable the way that you think that they are in a business, right? Like I've never wanted to look at anybody like they're expendable because what I understand is my investment into them, if it's reciprocated, how well I treat them, how much I want them to grow, and that reciprocal act will allow the organization to grow in the same relative value.
Right.
So they grow individually, the company grows individually and or simultaneously,
Right.
whatever you want to call it. So it very much was the demise of a corporation. So I think that's probably one of the best examples. Like I said, I've had a handful of people I've worked for, but when you had two leaders and one was high EQ only, one was a little bit separated because he was growing the vision. There was no way to fix it.
Right.
He had spilt the milk.
Do you, not necessarily both positions in leadership, I should say, but do you think, I'm just sitting here thinking about, like, if we look at the success map of, you know, any successful company that's got multiple people in a director position or principal position or leadership, et cetera, do you think that you have a higher success rate or chance of success if you have one or two people that are just IQ oriented straight across?
I think they serve their purpose.
Yeah,
for sure.
We've got one.
We definitely have. We definitely have one. And what's not known about some of these people is they very much have all the empathy and all the other stuff. The one we're referencing in the video.
Yeah.
You know, kind-hearted humans, but they think business in terms of business, right? And I can tell you, he serves, and in other, you know, related jobs I've been in, they do serve a purpose.
Very much.
Because if you have somebody who's thinking completely calculated all the time, no empathy, just value drivers and expenses and so on and so forth, then you could set a good grid or a good framework of how you want to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not going to go in the same sequence that person would think that it is, because we have to introduce that little thing called chaos. Right. And, you know, what is it? Free will.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Everybody has to choose to want to follow that roadmap. And if they don't, what are you going to do? You're going to rebuild the roadmap and start over, or you're going to find a way to evolve into the roadmap. And that's where an emotionally intelligent leader is going to be able to fill those.
Well, I think that one of the purposes of somebody with tremendously high IQ or very type A type person, very good at risk mitigation.
Absolutely.
Whereas somebody who leads very much EQ forward could be more blind to it.
Absolutely. I can say for certain that my high EQ focus, you know, leadership position has put us into a bind as an organization multiple times.
Right.
Where I believe so wholeheartedly that somebody has what I want and they just haven't yet found a way to bring it out of them, of themselves or whatever. It's like I'm wanting more for them than they want for themselves. Mm-hmm. And I let it ride way too long. Mm-hmm. Where if I would have listened to, you know, the person with the roadmap a little bit more, we probably would have cut that a long time before, and we wouldn't have wasted so much expense, or, you know, I can just say expense in general, but it's like time, right? Which ultimately is opportunity cost, everything else.
So what would you say I have an idea in my head, but I'm curious if you put somebody that's very IQ based versus EQ based, and there are those unicorns, we can call them, that are, you know, like Nolan, mm-hmm. who have extremely high IQ and extremely high EQ. Mm-hmm. But what do you think the example I'm thinking of is if you have an employee or somebody present with a problem, or let's say something that they're doing is a problem, behavior, mm-hmm. performance lacking, whatever it is. My gut tells me somebody that's very EQ focused, or I should say IQ focused, is very quick to respond, not very constructively, mm-hmm. very black and white, mm-hmm. or their first initial impulse is to think of this is why they're wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Or this is what's going wrong. Whereas I feel like somebody that's very EQ focused, the first thing they think about is a question. Mm-hmm. They're like, what could be happening here, mm-hmm. right? Or what are the contributing factors that would be lending in this poor performance? Or what are the contributing factors that maybe lent to this poor decision, mm-hmm. right? Whatever that may look like. So I think that, like, I've been very quick to tell some people here, even in the past, that are more type A, to be a little bit more patient, mm-hmm. Or compassionate, mm-hmm. and be like, hey, you know, maybe this person just doesn't quite understand what you're barking at them, mm-hmm. and maybe they're too afraid to ask, mm-hmm. right?
I think it all has its time and place.
Right.
I think that there's absolutely times in business where maybe only the owner or the leader or team, whoever, knows what the true organizational health is.
Hmm.
And maybe you do need to make very quick and
Yeah.
abrupt changes, right? Absolutely, it has its time and its place, and it would make sense to make the most logical or highly intelligent decision at that point rather than investigating,
Hmm.
because you don't have time for patience,
Right.
right? However, I always fade to the other side of asking questions and looking at the mechanism rather than the solution, looking at
Right.
the reaction rather than the solution.
Right.
We're talking chemistry or whatever. But when somebody does something at Pride wrong,
Right.
right? I usually am not necessarily mad at that one piece. What I've already done is I've done enough analysis of it, and I've been around it long enough that I can think back to the 3 or 4 pieces well before that where
Mhm.
we probably did something wrong or
Right.
didn't instruct them the correct way, or so on and so forth. So you have to give some, you got to give a buffer to, I don't know if that's the right word, but you've got to give some kind of um, reasonable analysis to things before you can present a mutually conducive and progressive answer to anything that's going on. If somebody does something wrong, that's what I mentioned that in a couple of videos back when I brought up the flippant narcissist
Mhm.
word that you didn't like hearing. But it's like I'm always thinking, where did I go wrong in my instruction of them first?
Right.
Right. If it's not my instruction of them, and I've given my due diligence to correct and respond and empathize and put myself in their shoes or whatever it is, and it's happened multiple times, I'm going to be quick to use an IQ response,
Right.
right? A calculated, let's fix this, let's nail this, whatever. And I'm going like this, like cut them, like we fire everybody all the time, but it's like let's excise that little
Right.
piece because I know it's going to happen again because we've already seen it happen multiple times. Some people don't want to have things repeat
Mhm.
or give opportunity for repeat, and I think that's actually where a lot of losses of organizations come from because it makes sense at the time, but it doesn't necessarily add to a growth-minded
Right.
organization.
So if we talk like the 5 character traits more or less that people that have a very high EQ um, possess, it's pretty simple. It's empathy, social skills, self-awareness, self-regulation, and motivation. Um, I like, and maybe we could pinpoint motivation because I think that that's a very prevalent thing in our industry. Maybe we highlight motivation and then we dive deeper into some of these other ones in the next video. But in your experience with practicing, and I would say that you operate at a very high level of EQ.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. um, so if we've got a person that, you know, let's say they're intrinsically motivated by money, right? And they're sitting in the same room as somebody who is very intrinsically motivated by impact, right? Those are 2 very different motivators, right? So one of the things that I enjoy about leading a team of people that are consistently selling and interacting with people day in and day out is how do we adapt and communicate in the language that this person needs to be communicated in so that they best understand what you're getting to, right? I don't think that, and maybe they will after they watch this video if they watch it, but I don't think they realize that a lot of the time when I'm teaching, when I speak to them individually, I'm speaking to them in their language, right? So if I'm teaching them how to pitch, right, or if I'm teaching them how to overcome objections, the way that I speak to the first person is how they speak. The way that I speak to the third person is how they speak. I don't know if they've picked up on that yet. Who knows, right? But like, what things do you notice um, about yourself that you've learned about leading with emotional intelligence? I mean, and you could use some of us as an example of how to properly motivate somebody like me versus somebody like Crew,
Hmm.
right? Like what's because we have the same end goal,
Hmm.
right? But arriving to that end goal, I need very different gasoline than he does,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So when you sit back and observe or think about ways to, and you don't have to use us two as an example, but like anybody, how do you dissect? Because I obsess over it sometimes in my head of like, how can I get through to this person
Hmm.
better?
Yeah.
How can I motivate or influence this person more effectively than I'm doing right now?
Hmm. Well, I think I think a lot of it has to be done through. Well, you got to be kind of investigatory without people understanding that,
Mm-hmm.
right? You got to ask a lot of questions. You got to open people up,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, when I worked in the gym industry, we learned this pretty well,
Pain points.
which is like, okay, in a gym. So I promise I'll
Yeah.
get back to the point. But in the gym, if you wanted to sell personal training, you'd ask, why is it, or what is your goal,
Mm-hmm.
right? And people like, well, I want to lose weight. And you'd ask, well, why do you want to lose weight? So there's about 100 responses to that question,
Right.
right? And they're like, well, ever since I had a baby, right, I haven't been able to shed the pounds, and I want to look good for my husband.
Right.
Well, why do you want to look good for your husband?
Right.
Right, and you'll go to level 3 or level 4 or level 5 before you even start your pitch,
Yep.
because that tells you a whole lot about the person's personality and what their trigger pieces are. I don't know what the right word would be, their X factor, their trigger
Mm-hmm.
points, whatever it is, because it's not to say that I want to manipulate people or anything like that, but in order to speak to them, I have to know them,
Mm-hmm.
not just know your name and your resume. I need to know who you are and what drives you. So asking a lot of questions is generally how I get to a point where I know how I want to speak to people.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to like focus it on like somebody who wants to have an impact,
Mm-hmm.
we got to find out what that impact really is. Do you want to have an impact on your team and the people around you? Do you want to have an impact on your clients, or do you want to have an impact on both, and so on and so forth? But um, the other part that's a little bit difficult sitting in the position that I sit in is that I have to make sure that all of it coalesces and can compound on top of each other while maintaining the same brushstroke on the canvas. Everybody has to march to the same, like in the same direction the organization wants to go with everything that you're saying, right? So like talk about the group scenario first. If you're in a group scenario and you know that person A is money motivated, person B is impact motivated, person 3 is personal growth motivated, then I have to present everything that I'm saying in a way that's like, okay, this is the organization's why factor, and if we have this impact as an organization, it will result in this amount of money, that could be your commission and
Mm-hmm.
ultimately add to the growth of the organization. It has to be in a one broad stroke all at the same time.
Right.
Whereas if I'm talking to you, I know that you're an impact guy.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you want to have an impact on the people around you, and you want to have an impact on the growth of the organization. You want to be a foundational piece. So I'm going to talk to you about, here's how we get into positions where we always maintain constant growth, and you have more opportunity to meet with more people and have your individual
Right.
skill. Whereas money motivated guy, it's going to be less about the organizational growth, or less focused on organizational growth, and more focused on what happens when the growth of the organization happens.
Right.
Right, what's your impact when, like, it's just a flip-flopped perspective, but you're saying the same things and
Yep.
you're also in line. I don't know if that was a good answer to
No, it was.
the
I mean,
question, but
yeah, it's exactly. I mean, I think that um, it's understanding. I think one of the biggest things about EQ is having a firm grasp on delivering the same message, speaking a different language.
message. Actually, I remember one time, I mentioned this a ways back on my first job, or as a manager of
Mhm.
people. And I was just scared out of my wits to do it, because I was like, I've never managed people before, and half these people are older than me. I don't think that I'm the right guy, whatever. But I was asked to do something where I had to lead a conference call with
Mhm.
all of the different leaders, or all the different managers, and whatever else. And what that was actually a really useful thing because I was in a like I introduced it, my boss introduced friction, right? And where there's friction, there potentially can be growth depending on how
Right.
you utilize it, right? Which was something really uncomfortable, me speaking in front of a bunch of people about something that I'm supposed to be an expert at.
Hmm.
So I dove into a lot of literature and I would literally write these like 4 or 5 page like prompts for myself for these calls. And I'd have to get into this like closed room with nobody obstructing anything, no noises, so that when I had this call, I could hit all the points that I wanted to and ask all the people. But anyways, the reason I bring this up is because I learned a lot about tailor fit management at that
Right.
point in time. And I think like the term by itself is it explains itself. It's
Hmm.
tailor fit to the person that you're managing, but you can't have the same management style or strategy with every single person because every single person comes from a different home, from a different life. They had different chaoses, different obstacles, different everything. And if you think that it's a one size fit all, you are going to be very minimally successful
Hmm.
as a manager. You might speak to 4% or 25% or whatever it is, but you're not speaking to the whole team.
Yeah. It's funny. Um, I had a boss when I was uh, young. I think I was 20. Um, and he seemed to lead everybody like he was, the linebacker coach of a football team and just scream and yell all day long. And I remember I was like 6 days into this job and I was like, I really like the job, but I hate this human being,
Mhm.
right? And I had a conversation with somebody of mine who was kind of like a mentor to me, and he said, you know, maybe he's never been shown or communicated that the way that he is managing
Mhm.
isn't effective,
Mhm.
or maybe it's been effective,
Mhm.
right? And it might not get the most out of you, but it might be effective for everybody else. He said, why don't you just talk to him about
Well, and some people are really narrow-minded. They're
it? Yeah.
like, I'm going to stick to one script because I only want people who are going to respond to this, and I'm
Right.
just going to deal with the turnover on the other side. But think about how long of a process that is and how unsuccessful you're going to be until you finally have all the people who are actually going to listen to what you
Yeah. I
have to
mean,
say.
how many, you have 100 people, right? And if your goal is to keep seven, right? That's a lot of people that you got to go through who are like, screw this guy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And sometimes you just don't have the time to do that.
Yeah.
And people may not want you in that position for
Yeah.
very long.
But I remember this conversation I had with him. I walked up to him one day. I was terrified,
Hmm.
right? And I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, you can't manage me this way." I was like, I'll be your best performer, but I don't respond to this." I was like, when you're yelling and barking orders, all I'm feeling is berated and belittled,
Hmm.
right? I was like, so then when I go to work, I don't want to do anything. I was like, if you want to talk to other people like that, that's fine. But to me, I need you to be, I need you to lead more positively,
Hmm.
right? Like I don't do well with negative reinforcement.
Right.
So, and it was difficult for him to grasp. He was like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "What do you mean? What do I mean?" I
Hmm.
was like, "I don't like being yelled at, you know." And it took him like, I want to say 6 weeks or so, and then he would he would do these group meetings where he would scream and yell, and then we would go off to our respective areas and work, and he would come over to me and he would be like, "But I think you're doing a really good job." Right? And but for me, genuinely, I was like, "Oh, he noticed."
Yeah.
Right? And that changed, and that inherently affected my work speed, my output, everything.
Hmm.
And I was very successful at that point. But, um, I think that adaptability is one of the principles of, you know, leading with emotional intelligence, right? But, and self awareness, right? So, like, one of the things that um, I've noticed you be very cognizant of is the like you'll pre-apologize,
Hmm.
right? So you'll be like, I'm gonna come off as a dick, but
Disclaimer.
but understand my intention is this, or I feel passionately about this,
Hmm.
or this is where we are and this is where we need to be, right? It's almost like a waiver
Hmm.
for your you know
Yeah.
level of passion or excitement or
Or irritation.
irritation over something, right? But it's like most most leaders, especially I would say in the older days, quote unquote, but like most leaders would just come in and bull in a china shop, right? Screw this, screw that. You guys suck. All of you guys are not doing what I want you to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody goes back and they're like, screw that guy. He wants us to perform,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's like, it's almost like you're leveling the room.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm going to get pissed,
Mm-hmm.
but probably for about 10 minutes, right? And then I'll come out on the other side. But what that's demonstrating, I don't think that a lot of people pick up on it, but that's a very high level of emotional intelligence to be like, I'm going to forewarn these people about this is why I'm acting like this.
Mm-hmm.
It's temporary, but I need to get my point across,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right?
You know, it's I can I don't know if that's something that I like developed through research or anything like that. I think honestly that has to do with a lot of my people pleasing side of
Mhm.
me, and if fares well in today's day and age with the way that people respond, what we're learning and what the research tells us that
Mhm.
people actually respond to. But it's like, yeah, it's I want people to understand. I want people to understand that there is a reason that we're going through this.
Mhm.
I'm going to explain it to you, and I'm going to explain it to you in a way that I want you to hear it, and then we're going to let it become something that's
Right.
like, I don't know, useful.
Right. Right. So, what I'd like to do next video is dive a little bit deeper into the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to do some research or refresh your research
Yeah, sure.
on I want to say how impactful and or career changing or life changing a leader can be in somebody's life based on tailor-made management, right? Or managing them the way that they need to be managed versus the group consensus, right?
Sure.
And then I want to factor in some of these principles like the 3 Ds and the 3 Cs and talk about something that I think, especially in our industry, which is very blue collar type A, do exactly what I tell you to do, exactly when I want it, exactly how I want it, and don't ask questions.
Or get your face ripped off.
Right. You know, I just think of Josh in that aspect. Like, this is the construction industry, so buckle up.
Well,
Right.
That's the way it's always been.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to give some heavy bullet points on some things, but what I want to talk about next time is maybe a little bit more personal into your obsession into the brain, why it's there, right? And then how you utilize the things that you learned that might be a little harder to dig up, that are probably supplanted in your subconscious from college into and maybe even some more things that you learned from Nolan into how that affects today.
Yep.
Right.
Sure. Well, I think it's a good way to summarize I guess, video one on emotional intelligence, which is people don't leave businesses, they leave managers or leaders.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think that I want to touch on a principle that I learned, which is the use of understanding body language, how somebody speaks, their tonality in the recruiting or interview process that can help future cast their performance based on subtle cues that really have almost exclusively to do with just understanding emotional intelligence. Right.
Well, that one thing I can dive into. That's like my superpower.
I know. Well, that's why
yours too.
That's why I want. That's why this one is I think maybe a multiple part one, because I think that it does make you very, I'll say, positively dangerous as a leader, right? Or you have a much more keen ability to impact, right? If you can speak the language of the people that that they're fluent to. So let's dive into that next time. I think we're going to go into Christian superpower.
I'm not the only one who's good at it, but
Yeah.
it served me a good purpose.
And how that's affected his leadership, and how that affects how he trains the leaders here.
Cool.
So
Down with that.
thanks for tuning in.
Catch you on the flip side.